Hey, I'm Jim from Digital Anarchy, and in this tutorial we're going to take a look at an extreme example of slow motion flicker and use the Flicker Free plugin from Digital Anarchy to fix it in Final Cut Pro. And so the first step is to go to your effects console here and go to Digital Anarchy and grab Flicker Free and apply that to the clip, which I've already done. And the thing about this clip is that none of the built-in presets solve it completely. And so we're going to take a look at figure out what settings do work, what that process is. And to speed up this tutorial, I'm not going to explain what every single setting does. We have lots of other intro tutorials that go over that in depth. And so you can see after I've applied this that there is still flicker. It has not solved the problem completely. And so the first thing to check is whether the flicker can be removed at all. And so the easiest way is just take the rolling bands preset, turn detect motion off. That's going to give us a very blurry image, but it'll allow us to see that the flicker can be removed. Unfortunately, there's a lot of blurring that happens, and that's not good. But the trick now is to keep the video deflickered while getting rid of the blurring. And the easiest way to do that is either use detect motion, which we've seen already doesn't work, or motion compensation. So we'll turn on motion compensation. And one thing about Final Cut is that you may need to go to Modify and Render All to see the results of Flicker Free. It is not a real-time plugin. And so usually you're going to use Render All because it's not real-time, you want to turn off background rendering. You want this off because if you have a really long clip that you're trying to deflicker, if this is on, you're going to be trying to render in the background, you're going to be trying to render in the foreground, and it's really going to slow things down. So generally, for working with Flicker Free, you want to have background render turned off. Okay, but we can see that motion compensation does fix the problem. The flicker is gone, the blurring is gone, the video overall looks pretty great. However, with Flicker Free, the time radius plays a pretty important role. This is how many frames plugin's going to look at before where the playhead is and after. So if we turn Flicker Free off, we can see the flicker is actually happening every other frame. It's really fast. So we may not need a time radius of 8 where it's looking at 8 frames before and 8 frames after. So let's try and change this to 3, and we can see that, and the flicker is still gone. And the nice thing about having a time radius of 3 versus 8 is that it's going to render a lot faster and you're less likely to have artifacts. So overall, the lower you can have time radius, the better off you're going to be for a whole variety of reasons. So let's take a look at a different piece of footage. Okay, so with this flicker, it's a much longer duration. It's probably happening over 15-20 frames. And so we're going to need a longer time radius. So let's apply Flicker Free. And we can see by applying that, using the rolling bands preset, it's done a decent job. Some of the flicker is removed, but it's not completely gone. And so we're going to need a longer time radius because the flicker is happening over a longer time period. So I'm going to change this to 16. And now we can take a look at it. And the flicker is pretty much gone. It looks much better than the original. Very, kind of a slow pulse that's happening. And so if we turn that off, it's gone. And the footage looks a lot better. But 16 is a really high value for time radius. Again, it's looking at 16 frames before the current frame and 16 after. And so that can really slow down your machine sometimes. So it's better if we can use a lower value. So let's set this back to 8. But let's set time step to 2 and see what that looks like. And that also looks just as good as when we had it with 16 frames for time radius. Now what's happening here with time step is it's looking at every other frame. The way we had it with 16 and 1 was it was looking at every single frame for 16 frames before and 16 frames after the current frame. In this case, it's only looking at 8 frames before and after, but it's looking at every other frame. And so the amount of time that it's looking at is the same, which is what's helping us get rid of that kind of longer flicker, but it's not using as many frames to do it. So again, the lower the time radius you can use, the better, the faster it's going to render, the less artifacts you're likely to have, less blurring, and it's just going to result in a better deflickering of the footage. So that about covers it for how to deflicker slow motion footage in Final Cut Pro. You can find more tutorials at digitalanarchy.com if you want intro tutorials that do a deep dive into all these parameters and how they work. And also, if you have your own footage that you're having trouble deflickering, feel free to send us a few seconds and we'll recommend some settings for you. You can always hit us up at sales@digitalanarchy.com. And that's it. So thank you for joining me. Hopefully you found it useful, and see you in the next tutorial.